So this is the 2014 Leave Insert Ordinary Level Paper 2, and we're looking at question number 2. When taking a penalty kick, the probability that Kevin scores is always 3/4. Part A says Kevin takes a penalty. What is the probability that he does not score? Okay, well, if the probability that he scores is 3/4, the probability that he does not score, or that he misses, so I'll call that the probability of M, or miss, is 1 minus 3/4, which is 1/4. Part B says Kevin takes 2 penalties. What is the probability that he scores both? Okay, now, scores both, you can reinterpret that to mean that he scores the first and second. So first and second. And the word "and", remember, is always linked to the multiply sign in probability. So the probability that he scores the first one is 3/4, and is the multiply. The probability that he scores the second is also 3/4, because the probability that he scores is always 3/4, as it says in the question. So we just multiply these two fractions, and that gives us 9/16. Part C, Kevin takes 3 penalties. What is the probability that he scores exactly twice? Now, if Kevin takes 3 penalties and he scores exactly twice, that could be score, score, miss, score, miss, score, miss, score, score. So you can see they're all the different ways that can happen. Now, there is a formula in your tables book that you can use to do a question like this. It's called the binomial distribution, and this is the formula here. I'm just going to do it so that you can understand it first, and then we can talk about this after. So if Kevin takes 3 penalties, the probability that he scores exactly twice would be, well, the first one, score and miss. So that would be 3/4 and 3/4 and a miss, 1/4. So that's the first one. So it's this, or it could be this. So it could be 3/4 and a miss, 1/4, and another score, 3/4. Or it could be miss, which is 1/4, and a score, which is 3/4, and multiply sign, another score, which is 3/4. So if we work each of these out, 3/4 by 3/4, that's 9/16 by 1/4. 9/16 by 1/4 gives us 9/64. This here is going to give us the same. It's the same fractions in a different order being multiplied. And so will this one here. So if it's this way, or this way, or this way, the word "or" is linked to a plus sign in probability. So remember, the word "and" is for multiply, the word "or" is for plus. So I'm going to have to add these 3 fractions now to find my total. So that gives me 27/64. So that's the probability that he scores exactly twice. If you're going to use the binomial distribution, you just need to remember a couple of things. P is the probability of success, which in our case we would say is a score. So P would be the probability of success if you're doing it with this formula. P is 3/4. Q is the probability of failure, which in our case would be a miss, which is 1/4. N is the number of trials, So that's he takes 3 penalties, so n would be 3. And or would be the number of successes. So the number of successes is 2, because we're saying what's the probability that he scores twice. Okay, so by using these values here and plugging them into this formula, we're going to see, do we still get this answer here? So I'm just showing you another way to do the same question now. So this formula is NCOR, so that this here big bracket with n on top and or on the bottom, that can also be written as n over or like that with a bracket, is the same as NCOR, which is a button on your calculator. If you're using a Casio, it's just above the division sign, so you press shift divide sign and you get the NCOR button. So we can use this symbol here instead. So we're going to use this in place of here. So we're going to have n, the number of trials is 3. So 3c, or the number of successes is 2. And then that's multiplied by p to the power of or. So p is 3/4. To the power of or is the number of successes, which is 2. And then that's multiplied by q to the power of n minus or. So q is the probability of failure, or a miss in our case, 1/4. To the power of n minus or, so that's 3 minus 2. So if you put all of this here into your calculator, exactly as it's written here, and pressing equals, you end up getting the same answer up here, 27 over 64. So that's 2 ways to do that question. Okay, and finally, Kevin takes 5 penalties. What is the probability that he scores for the first time on his 5th penalty? Well, if he scores first on his 5th, that means it's a miss with the first, miss with the second, miss with the third, miss with the fourth, and then a score on the 5th. So it's the probability of miss and miss and miss and miss and score. And remember, and is linked to the multiply sign. So that's going to be equal to 1/4 for the first miss, and 1/4, and 1/4, and another quarter, and finally on his 5th go he scores 3/4. So when we put all of this here into our calculator, we get 3 over 1024. So quite low, the probability. So that's the end of part D and the end of question number 2.